So with the drums now laid down, they're sounding pretty complete and just how we'd expect them to sound at the end of the production. I think they're going to benefit from some compression, obviously, but that's something that we're going to approach later.
Yeah, the reason why we approach compression later and not now is we find it better, we find it a better way to compress parts when the whole mix is together. It helps us to keep a real perspective of the mix and enables a better balance. If we were to compress the kick now, it might sound well at the moment, but when all the track is together, we may get into a battle to get the other parts to gel.
Yeah. Anyway, moving on. The next step is to complete the groove by programming the bass timbre. Now, as we touched upon it in the first session, we only use the instruments we programmed as a more inspirational general MIDI kit, and as we start to produce the track, we start to replace the timbres one by one. Now, obviously with the drums down, the bass is going to be the next place to go, since the drums and bass are going to present the entire groove of the record. Now, before we start to program the bass, I think it's imperative to once again listen to the record. Now, I always recommend listening back to what you have so far, so you can let your imagination run wild with it. I find that too many jump straight in and try to program a bass timbre straight away without listening to what they have first and thinking about what would fit with that particular drum loop. I think the more that you listen back to what you do, the more you'll be able to come to decisions more quickly, and for us this is incredibly important. I know some producers prefer to just sit and play until they come up with something they like, and there's nothing wrong with that at all. It's just that we prefer to have a good idea of our direction before we start programming. I find it incredibly counterproductive to just jump in saying we need a bass timbre and then just start playing around. In my opinion, if you have no idea where you're going, how can you possibly expect to get there? Of course, you can experiment for as long as you like, playing around with different bass timbres, but we find that if you have a pretty good idea of the type of timbre, you end up getting to your goal a lot quicker, and the record starts to gel quicker and get together faster. When we wanted to approach the subject of bass for this particular track, me and John sat down with the track playing in the background, as it is now. And we weren't exactly listening to it in a critical sense, rather we were just listening to it as background music while we discussed what type of bass we thought would suit this track. For us, we can generally determine the type of bass that will suit by asking a number of questions to each other. For example, should it be deep and heavy, bright and bouncy, punchy, short or long, distorted or rounded, analog or digital? I mean, obviously, because there's two of us thinking of sounds, we're never going to be exactly the same, so we can never have an exact idea of how it's going to sound between us. But we do try to have a good idea. For this particular track, between us we could hear a bass with some pluck to pull it through the mix, but also some distorted rasp. We can probably achieve that with distortion or a bit of tube saturation when we start programming. Also, since we plan to have the bass offbeat like most trance records, it needs to have a deep underlying throb to augment the kick and really drive the groove along. We also need to keep the bass short so it doesn't overlap the kick on each beat, so that means we'll need to be careful with the release parameters on the bass as we start to program. Of course, we're not going to be 100% definite on the sound, but as long as we have a good idea of the timbre's characteristics, when we go into synthesis, we've got a general idea of what we want to tweak and where our goals are, rather than just diving in blind and hoping for the best. So knowing that we need a plucky bass with some distorted rasp and a little bit of throb to it, we can start programming. Now, our approach is probably going to seem unusual to some of you, but we never ever accomplish any bass timbre for trance using just one synthesizer. Instead, we program the timbres on a number of synthesizers and then use processors and effects to finally sculpt the sound. Generally, I may work on one Mac, John will work on the other, he'll program a timbre, I'll program one, and then we'll merge them together and use filters and EQ to shape the timbre. I suppose in some ways this could be compared to using a typical subtractive synthesizer. You build a complex sound with oscillators and then you finally shape it with the envelopes and the filters. We do the same, we build a complex sound, but we use a number of synthesizers and then sculpt that final signal with processors and effects. Now, the reason we approach a bass for trance this way is simply because different synthesizers have different sonic properties, and the bass in trance is incredibly important. It underpins the leads. Therefore, to build a bass that attracts that interest, we can use the sonic properties of numerous synthesizers. For this example, we'll probably end up using one synth to build the pluck, another for the rasp, another for the throb, and maybe even double up on them a little more just to make it a bit stronger in each individual part that we think the bass needs. Then we'll use the mixing desk in Logic alongside filters, EQ, the SPL Transient Designer and other effects to finally sculpt that together to make it sound like one timbre. Now before I start programming here, I'm again going to reiterate that this course isn't intended for complete beginners, and I'm not going to discuss why we're tweaking each individual knob on each synthesizer that we choose. If we did, would be it for the next 6 months. Of course, if there's enough interest, we may look at releasing a DVD on synthesis and programming in the future. So I think we'll start our first bass timbre. We'll use the bass station to get it'll create a pluck with this and also create a throb as well. That's a nice low end, the bass station. Just turn it up a bit quiet there. We'll just adjust this to create a nice low end, nothing too much. You just sculpt the general timbre before we start working on the pluck. This is the key here to forming any plucky type timbre is the filter envelope decay. That's not sounding too bad. Surely a bass should be in mono and sit dead center so the energy is shared by both speakers. Well, yes it should, but it's important to understand that we're after a particular timbre here. We're not concerned with mixing, we want to retain a sound that we feel will complement the drums and create a groove suitable for the record. You can always come back, bounce this down, send it to mono. Just turn that down a little. No, it's not bad at all. Just rename that to the bass channel 2 and we'll copy it down again. This is our third instrument. Call it bass 3. Vanguard for this. Get some top end fizziness to the bass. I think I'll need to get this punch under some control first. This is pretty much how we go about programming a bass for trance. We'll continue to add instruments, program them, jump back to previous instruments to modify them. We'll add more instruments. We'll keep playing around. Let's get the FM8 in here. We have one of our favourite presets here, which is the Saturation 5th. This is great for a starting point for really gritty fizziness. There it is. We'll just adjust the timbre first, timbre level. I mean, well, good. What is it? 4 hours now. But we've got obviously the bass station, Sawyer, Vanguard, V station, the FM8. Obviously, we've added some clip distortion. We've got a couple of SPL transient designers in there, tube saturation, the Filter Freak, and some Flux E-Pure. But it's sounding okay. That I'm pretty happy with it. So I think what we'll do is we'll bounce the bass into 2 audio tracks. We'll bounce the top end and the bottom end. It's simply because the bottom end of bass can be a right royal pain in the arse when mixing. So we always like to keep this apart from the rest of the timbre if possible. So we'll get to bouncing this timbre down and along with the drums, and then we'll move on to reprogramming that lead timbre.